Part 51. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 501. In addition to the fact that Nan 11 doesn't like people who are related by blood to become in-laws, Prince Jing's house and Hao have the same surname as Xian Yuan, and they are from the same clan, so how can they possibly get married? Although according to their relationship, Nan 11 and Xian Yuan Qi are cousins, and her son and Xian Yuan Qi's children are distant cousins, but with the surname Xian Yuan, they can only be from the same clan. What's more, given the current prominence of Prince Jing's palace, if there is another layer of relationship with the future king, I am afraid that it will really surpass the dignity of the emperor. After the palace servants prepared lunch, Nan 11 and Rong Yu moved to the outer hall. Have you finished approving today's coupons? Rong Yu shook his head, no. Have someone move it here after lunch, Nan 11 said, I'll watch it with you. Rong Yu raised his eyes to look at her. Lest anyone say that we have been separated for so long, I don't even think about him, Nan 11 spoke indifferently, ignoring the palace people beside her who covered their mouths and laughed after saying this. It's been hot these 2 days, so it's not convenient to go out often. Instead of shopping, stay in the palace and read the book, and be a diligent queen. Rong Yu sat down next to her and said calmly, I have taken care of all the important things, leaving some less important ones for Xiejin to kill time. Nan 11 was speechless for a moment. I will make a special trip to accompany you in the afternoon, Rong Yu said, this way you don't have to endure the pain of lovesickness. Nan 11. Palace people. Xiejin, who was staying in the imperial study room to sort out the memorials with Xian Yuan Chen, suddenly sneezed. What happened to Mr. Xie? Xian Yuan Chen looked up at him, caught the cold. Xiejin subconsciously turned his head and looked out the window. The blazing sunshine had dried the branches. Even if there were ice cubes to cool down in the imperial study, the weather was so hot that his whole body was unbearably hot. Fortunately, he has martial arts skills and does not find the severe cold and hot weather too difficult, but Xian Yuan Chen does. Xiejin's eyes fell on his face. The young man's elegant and delicate face was covered with a layer of crystal, and his skin looked jade white and translucent. Danfan's eyes were slightly raised, and Xiejin said calmly, in such a hot weather, do you think I have caught the wind and cold? Xian Yuan Chen was speechless for a moment. I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? Xiejin glanced at him and spoke lightly, but his thoughts had already flown outside the palace. He thought of a certain young general hiding in the military camp. The weather was so hot that others found it unbearable to stay in the house, but he was training soldiers in the military camp, enduring the scorching sun from morning to night, which was really hard. And because he avoided him, the baby didn't leave the military camp for a long time. Xiejin clicked his tongue. Coward. Thank you, Master, Xian Yuan Chen called him hesitantly. These notes. Xiejin came back to his senses, looked at the miscellaneous memorials left on the imperial case, and said calmly, is there anyone else who persuades the queen to choose a husband? Xian Yuan Chen nodded, yes. As he said that, he took over the memorials that had been screened out and set aside. These are all. Who presented it? One is from Lin Yushi, Xian Yuan Chen said, his eyebrows slightly narrowed. He was once a staff member of the Wei Palace, and he rose from being the prince's attendant to the position of censor. He was promoted by his father. His grandfather created many opportunities for him to make meritorious deeds, so the censor's actions in the court must have been inspired by his father. Xiejin smiled casually when he heard this. Lin Yushi was born in the palace of the Prince of Wei. He knew that if the ministers in the court belonged to which faction he did not know, wasn't the identity of this imperial favorite in vain? However, since Her Majesty the Queen ascended the throne and the regent took over the power of the government, the Palace of Wei has not been very lucky. In addition to the sensitive identity of the deposed former emperor's grandson, the speed with which the King of Wei and his wife and Xian Yuanyan committed suicide is also astonishing. The courtiers belonging to the King of Wei's faction in the court may have seen the situation clearly, but recently they didn't dare to make trouble. Xiejin did not expect that Lin Yushi, the civil servant responsible for impeaching hundreds of officials, would actually start to take care of the affairs of the Queen's palace. Really desperate? He casually flipped through a few pamphlets admonishing the Queen to replenish the harem, secretly thinking that his family master and Her Majesty the Queen had been in close contact recently, and even government affairs could not stop him from enjoying the loving time with the Queen. If these memorials were brought to him, I'm afraid it will cause his old man to be in a bad mood again. Once the regent is in a bad mood, who will suffer? In addition to the fact that the culprit who submitted the memorial will definitely learn some lessons, Xiejin and Xianyuan Chen, the close ministers who often work around the regent, will also be innocently angered. Although the regent would not do anything to them, the low pressure all over his body was enough to make people unable to bear it. Thinking of this, Xiejin couldn't help but clicked his tongue again. This man is really full. He could have lived for a few more years, but he had to find happiness on his own. Xianyuan Chen said nothing. As a concubine of the Prince of Wei, although he had no feelings for the Prince of Wei, he took the initiative to reveal the secrets of the Prince of Wei. This behavior was actually somewhat inappropriate, at least it was considered unfilial, although this fact may not be hidden from Xiejin at all. Forget it, don't worry about it today. Xiejin dropped the topic lightly. I can find a reason to kill him in the future, so as not to worry about it. The old ministers of the Wei Palace will probably not be truly loyal to the Queen and the regent. Since they do not want to be officials and people, they should retire and return to their hometowns to farm as soon as possible. He said it lightly, but it made Xianyuan Chen feel awe-inspiring when he heard what he said. When he talked about killing the courtiers, his tone was as easy as crushing an ant. Xiejin ignored Xianyuan Chen's inner thoughts and took the time to read through the rest of the excerpts. After confirming that there were no important matters that needed to be dealt with, he said to Xianyuan Chen, I have to go back to the mansion. The regent should have nothing to do in the afternoon regarding the matter. You can go home and see your mother first, or you can stay here to read more files and get to know the ministers in the court better, so that you can answer the regent's questions in the future. Xianyuan Chen only considered it for a moment. I want to go back to the palace first. It's up to you. Xiejin hummed, turned around and walked out. Now you are a courtier with an official position, and Xuanyuan can't do anything to you. Protect yourself and don't let others bully you stupidly. Xianyuan Chen followed him and listened to him quietly. After Xiejin finished speaking, he said respectfully, those masters arranged by Master Zhu in my mother's yard. What? Xiejin glanced at him, do you think they are in the way? No, it's not. Xianyuan Chen shook his head and said hesitantly, I just feel that I shouldn't bother Master Zhu anymore. Xiejin sneered, those I picked for you are all well-known masters. Only with them can your mother be safe. Otherwise, do you think Princess Wei can tolerate your mother living smoothly, or Xianyuan can let you, are you living such a carefree life? Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbspeed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 502. Xianyuan Chen didn't say anything. He knew Xiejin was right. If it weren't for those masters protecting her, his mother wouldn't have been able to live so smoothly these days, and her body wouldn't have recovered so quickly. As for him, he couldn't concentrate on his work without any worries. He was just using Xiejin's people, and he always felt that he owed him a favor, and he didn't know how to repay him in the future. If you feel that you owe me, just be loyal to the Queen and the regent in the future. I don't care so much, Xiejin said in a light tone. I helped you in accordance with the will of the regent, not just for you. Even if you really want to thank, just thank Her Majesty the Queen and the Regent. Xian Yuan Chen hummed, I will repay the kindness of His Majesty and the Regent. Xie Jin didn't say anything more to him. He took the carriage back to Xie's house and called his personal subordinates, go prepare some fresh and chilled fruits and send them to the western suburbs military camp to the Chief General of the Black Obsidian Army, Prince Yao. Yes. The subordinates took the order and left. Xie Jin sat on a brocade couch covered with a cool mat, leaning back, looking out the window nonchalantly, thinking about the guy's reaction after receiving the fruit, and the corners of his lips couldn't help but curl up. Well, military commanders are really hard-working. Especially Yao Baobao, who was ordered to take a special mission and must build an elite army in 2 years. I'm afraid he will have to stay in the barracks for the rest of his life. Thinking of this, Xie Jin couldn't help feeling a little melancholy. Master the Jinyuan guard came to report, Madam is here. Xie Jin turned around and saw Madame Xie walked in, followed by her 2 personal maids. Why is mother here? Xie Jin stood up, didn't you go to drink tea with the ladies today? Who wants to drink tea every day in the hot summer? Ms. Xie walked into the house and found a comfortable low couch to sit down. The maid behind her massaged her shoulders, where did you ask your men to send the fruits? Xie Jin raised an eyebrow, why? Send it to Yao Yao. Xie Jin was silent for a moment, mother, he has a name. Opening his mouth Yao Yao and closing his mouth Yao Yao, isn't it cheesy? I know. Ms. Xie glanced at him, her tone sounded relaxed and playful, his name is Xianyuan Yao, and his nickname is Yao Yao, which is nice. Xie Jin looked at her expressionlessly. Don't look at me like that. Ms. Xie frowned, her tone was a little dissatisfied, I will think that my son is not filial to his mother. When the time comes, I will complain to your father. Do you believe that he will make you and Yao Yao never see each other again? Xie Jin was silent for a moment, turned around and sat down on the brocade couch beside him, and couldn't help but sighed secretly. Just say he should be melancholy. Even though he was not afraid of the worldly eyes and gossip, besides his father, there was Rong Yu who was an obstacle that he could not overcome temporarily, and the Huainan king and his wife who were in Huainan. Xie Jin was not afraid of his father. After all, his father's thoughts were different from other old pedants. He was very open-minded and always believed in the famous saying that life was short and he needed to enjoy himself while he could. Whether it was for himself or Xie Jin, he only had one requirement, to live happily under the premise of being upright and having a clear conscience. So he had always been allowed to do everything and would not interfere with him too much. It was just that having a clear conscience sounded easy, but everyone had different standards for understanding it. Fortunately, although Xie Jin had a somewhat unruly temperament, he was not raised crooked in general. As for the inheritance of his descendants, Prime Minister Xie did not have a forced attitude, but Xie Jin knew in his heart that his father's open-minded attitude did not mean that others could also be open-minded. So this matter probably needed his father's help, otherwise he could not say whether he could get what he wanted. Xie Jin was silent for a moment, mother. Madame Xie picked up the herbal tea served by the maid, drank 2 sips elegantly, and looked up at Xie Jin, what's wrong? Don't you think this kind of thing has exceeded moral ethics? Xie Jin looked at her, although I am quite willful, in terms of lifelong affairs, you and my father must agree sincerely. Madame Xie raised her eyebrows, lowered her eyes, drank the icy and refreshing herbal tea in her hand, put the teacup aside, and then spoke slowly, if your father and I oppose it, will you kill the idea in your heart? Xie Jin said, that won't happen. Morality and ethics are all written by the so-called ancient saints. When they set moral standards, they certainly didn't have the courage to cross the line of morality and ethics, or they didn't have such an idea. Madame Xie said in a light tone, but there is no shortage of such things in history, but because they are rare, they are not accepted by most people. However, some so-called gentlemen appear to be glorious on the surface, but don't they do a lot of dirty things in private? Xiejin didn't speak. I have always believed that no matter what you do, as long as it does not infringe on the interests of others and does not bring harm or trouble to others, then no one has the right to point fingers. After all, you did not eat his rice, and the inheritance of offspring has nothing to do with others. MRSCS smiled. In this matter, you don't have to worry about anything else. The only thing you need to consider is the attitude of Xian Yuanyao's parents. If they strongly oppose it and do not allow this to happen, then you probably really need to consider giving up. After all, you want someone else's son, and you still have to respect this. This is the bottom line. Bottom line? Xiejin lowered his eyes, and the corners of his charming eyes were filled with a deep and unfathomable color. Jin'er, I think this road is not easy for you to take. MRSCF frowned. Yao Yao looks like a completely heartless child. He probably never thought about it. You. It's not that he didn't think about it, Xiejin said in a light tone, he is now scared and hiding. Ah. MRSCF looked at him with strange eyes. You're scaring people before you even spell out your horoscope? Don't you know that everything should be done step by step? Xiejin's expression was subtle. Every time I see him, I can't help but want to tease him. MRSCF. I don't think it's a problem with King Huainan, Xiejin said. At worst, let them have another one. By the way. Having said this, Xiejin suddenly raised his head and looked at MRSCF. My parents are not very old now, why not give birth to a son while we are still young? Otherwise, the Xie family will really have their bloodline cut off in the future. MRSCF's face turned red. How come you are so good and you suddenly talk about me? I'm just making a suggestion. MRSCF sighed. I don't want to give birth. Why? I'm afraid you'll fall out of favor. Xiejin was speechless for a moment. After holding it for a long time, he said, Mom, you are too worried. I never worry about falling out of favor. He's an adult, okay. Is it possible that he still plans to be pampered until he is 40 years old? But it hurts to have a baby. Melancholy appeared on MRS. Who won it for you? Xiejin paused. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 503. In fact, from the development of Xiejin's temperament, we can probably tell the temperament and behavior of Xie Xiaofu and MRSCF. The Xie family had many wives and concubines, as well as many concubines and concubines. If MRSCF could keep herself and her son safe for 20 years just by relying on Xie Qifu's favor, it was not necessarily true. Most of them were due to her own abilities. After Xie Xiaofu's heart was planted on her, MRSCF could still tolerate the concubines and concubines of the Xie family to live peacefully, and their lives were far more nourishing than those of other concubines from official families. Even though their status was not as high as that of Xiejin's, the legitimate sons are high, but as long as the concubines don't commit suicide, MRSCF and her son never bother to pay attention to these people, let alone deliberately suppress the concubines. To show their status. You can't blame Xiejin for being ruthless when he took the initiative to commit suicide. So on this point, we can also see that she has a different mind from other boudoir ladies. Although MRSCF is a woman, she is actually more free and easygoing than many men in the world. Xiejin's free-spirited temperament mostly follows her. In her words, above the bottom line of having a clear conscience, the most important thing is to be happy. Because of this, when Xiejin realized that he was taking his joke seriously and had different feelings for that guy, he decided to have a frank talk with his father. That night in the study, the father and son rarely talked for a long time. In fact, it was Xie Xiaozu who hadn't sat down and talked with his son for a long time, so he didn't miss the opportunity and dragged him to talk for a full 2 hours. In the end, Xie Xiaofu came to the same conclusion as MRSCF, respecting his son's choice and decision. The Xie family does not need to worry about the inheritance of heirs, but the Huainan king needs to solve it himself, and the Xie family will not provide him with any help. Xie Jin was in a happy mood, with contentment in the corners of his brows and eyes. If a son doesn't even have the ability to deal with his future father-in-law, why should he have a relationship? Forget it, he will be alone until he grows old. Xie Xiaofu was not as optimistic as him. If King Huainan insists on objecting, you can't force it, and you can't let Xian Yuanyao do anything disobedient and unfilial. A man in this world, once he gets the reputation of being disobedient and unfilial, will never be able to turn around in his life. Thank you, father, for the advice. Xie Jin smiled. My son would rather go to hell by himself than take Xian Yuanyao with him. If it can really come true in the end, it will be considered a happy relationship between the two people, and a beautiful relationship is what people yearn for after all. But Xie Jin knew that the reason why he was attracted to that guy was because he had pure and beautiful qualities that he didn't have, and his eyebrows could not hide the bright and charming energy. As an aristocrat of the royal family, Xian Yuanyao stayed at the border with his father all year round. He did not have any of the graceful dancing skills of the powerful princes of the imperial capital. He was obviously a descendant of the Tian family, but he was willing to be loyal and obedient to those who were stronger than him. His sharp edge was hidden in his bones, bright and smooth. Elegance replaced the original aloofness. He is like a little son, attracting people's attention and making those who get along with him involuntarily feel happy. He is just the right amount of warmth, not so blazing that it makes people feel hot. He has no scheming, is simple and straightforward, and is extremely easy to get along with. Compared with Xie Jin's delicate heart, Xian Yuanyao is a pure and simple young man. Xie Jin will follow his inner emotions to fight for this relationship, but he will also protect him within his own ability. If in the end his wishes are really disdained by Xian Yuanyao, or may cause harm to him, Xie Jin may consider stopping and will never act to force him. But for now, losing without a fight is not his style. After talking to his mother, Xie Jin felt that the time had come for him to act, but it was not advisable to act too hastily at the moment. As his mother said, emotional matters should be done step by step, and you should not eat hot tofu in a hurry. Half an hour later, his subordinates hurried back to the house. When they entered Jinyuan, their expressions were obviously depressed. Report to the young master. Xie Jin came back from his distant thoughts and raised his eyes to look at his returning men. When he saw the fruit basket in his hand, he narrowed his eyes slightly. What? Prince Yao said he didn't want it, his subordinates said respectfully, and placed the fruit basket on the yellow pearwood table in front of Xie Jin. The sun is scorching hot, and the soldiers are working very hard. As a general, I should share the joys and sorrows with the soldiers, so thank you very much for your kindness, Master Yao. These are the exact words of Prince Yao. Xie Jin was silent for a moment, with no emotions of joy or anger on his face. He just said lightly, I know, let's go down. Yes. Xie Jin held his chin, his eyes falling on the beautifully woven fruit basket. In order to keep the chilled fruits cool, a layer of soft and absorbent cotton cloth was laid at the bottom of the fruit basket, and a layer of ice cubes was laid on the cotton cloth. Then several boxes of cut watermelons, pears, peaches, and a pot of iced sour were placed. Plum juice, a pot of herbal tea. However, after an hour of this going back and forth, I think the ice cubes should have melted into water. Fortunately, the cotton cloth absorbs water, and a little moisture under the basket is not a problem. Xie Jin reached out and opened the velvet covering the fruit basket. The icy and cool breath came out from inside, revealing a refreshing coolness. The fruit basket is not big, but it is filled with just a few kinds of fruits. The color is fresh and pleasing to the eye. Looking at this basket of iced fruits on a hot day, I am afraid that my index finger will move in an instant. However, the fruit was returned. Xie Jin couldn't help but clicked his tongue again. Okay, he didn't think carefully enough. He didn't take into account Xian Yuanyao's desire to share hardships with the soldiers. It's just that there are 10,000 people in the Obsidian army. If he takes care of everyone, how many carriages of fruit will it take? He could afford to give several carriages of fruit, but he was afraid that the news would reach the palace before the carriages arrived at the military camp. How would he explain that he was a mere fifth-rank counselor, but was so considerate of the soldiers? Xiejin picked up a bamboo stick, forked a piece of watermelon and put it into his mouth. The cool and sweet taste went from his throat into his lungs, eliminating some of the heat. Xiejin felt a little sorry that Yao Yao couldn't eat it. He thought to himself that it was his own intention after all, so why couldn't he be roundabout and find a place where no one was to taste a few pieces to cool down? They actually sent it all back. But then again, Xian Yuanyao was indeed a guy who could resist temptation. He was firm in his heart, considerate of the soldiers, and would not bow down for a little iced fruit. Xiejin would never think about it. Maybe it was because he gave the things, so Xian Yuanyao refused to accept them. Xiejin turned his head to look out the window, holding his chin, pondered for a moment, and said lightly, "Has the master come back?" "My lord, the master has been back for half an hour," the servant reported. After he came back, he went into the study. Xiejin smiled lightly, stood up, and walked out. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 504. Xie Xiaofu is in charge of military affairs and often does things more conveniently than others. Even if he abuses his power, it is not an abuse of power in the eyes of many people, but he is considerate of his subordinates, caring about the soldiers, caring about the country and the people, and having a heart of loyalty to the emperor and patriotism. Sending fruits to the army, well, the weather is so hot. As the chief minister of the government, it is appropriate to sympathize with the soldiers' hard work. So a memorial was presented. On the same day, Chief Xie sent people to the city market to buy fresh fruits in large quantities. He went to several places to buy them, loaded them into several carriages, and loaded 2 buckets full of ice cubes at the house. Together they were sent to the military camp in the western suburbs. Originally this was not a big deal. At least for Rong Yu, who wants to stay in Dajhan Palace to accompany Nan 11 all day long, it is indeed not a big deal. Xian Yuanyao is his favorite general, and the Black Obsidian Army is the elite he wants to support. He can reward him with some fruit on a hot day. It is also reasonable, although the regent himself has not had this idea. It's not that he doesn't know how to be considerate, but he rarely did anything to reward himself and his soldiers when he was leading the army. Except for Nan 11, Rong Yu had never shown tenderness to anyone else in his previous life. To myself too. Just because he doesn't do it himself doesn't mean he will object to others doing it. He didn't read the memorial presented by Chief Xie, but it was obviously impossible to hide the matter from him and Nan 11. After all, the secret guards around Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent are not decorations. Xie Xiaofu's behavior of ordering people to buy on a large scale is unusual. The fruits sent to the military camp represent a certain risk, in case someone is poisoned. Therefore, someone must report this matter to them in time. Rong Yu didn't have any special reaction after hearing this. Instead, Nan 11 was a little annoyed. On such a hot day, it's too hot to stay in the palace without going out, let alone the soldiers who are exposed to the scorching sun all day long. Why do you, the regent, just a little bit? Don't you even have the heart to cherish your subordinates? Rong Yu accepted her criticism calmly and sincerely admitted his mistake. I didn't think carefully. Your Majesty, please calm down. Nan 11 called Qing Yang. Instructions: starting from tomorrow, the Black Obsidian Army will supply fruits every 2 days, and the inner court manager Chiu and Xian Yuan Chen will be responsible for purchasing. This money will not go to the national treasury, and Chu Nanyi will collect it from the bank account take. Qingyang accepted the order. Yes. Your Majesty, Rong Yu's voice was low and gentle, sounding like a spring breeze. On behalf of all the soldiers of the Obsidian Army, I would like to thank Your Majesty for your grace. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows and smiled. Your Majesty spent the money from your private treasury, and used your money to win people's hearts. Instead, you thank me. What's yours and mine? Do we still share it with each other? Rong Yu frowned. 11er is too outspoken. Nan 11's tone was calm, as outsiders often say, brothers settle accounts clearly. 11er wants to be my brother, Rong Yu said in a strange tone. When did you have such an idea? Nan 11 paused and looked up at him silently. I've never heard that couples can become brothers. Rong Yu seemed not to notice Nan 11's eyes and said directly, 11er's idea is really unique. Nan 11 stretched out her hand and pinched his face unhurriedly. You are making fun of me. No, Rong Yu let her hold it without struggling. I'm just a little melancholy. What are you sad about? I'm so sad that 11er actually wants to be my brother. Is it over yet? Nan 11 glared at him. You're still picking on my topic. Rong Yu said, I didn't. If I really treat you as a brother, can I let you do whatever you want these past 2 nights? Nan 11 sneered. Which brother have you ever seen who sleeps in the same bed every night and still be in love with each other? Rong Yu was suddenly speechless. Have you ever seen any brothers who are so close that they can have children together? Rong Yu. It's endless, isn't it? If you keep bringing up the topic, sleep on the couch outside tonight. Nan 11 used her trump card to easily restrain him. If the queen doesn't show off her power, do you think I'm a sick cat? Rong Yu finally couldn't help it, and laughed so hard that his chest shook while burying his head on her shoulder. Can he say he did it on purpose? Because I really love Nan 11's domineering attitude right now. Gentle 11er, tolerant 11er, domineering 11er, calm 11er. Every aspect made him fall in love so much that he couldn't help himself. It is said that couples will get tired of being together for a long time, their relationship will fade as time goes by, and love will slowly evolve into family affection. But no one knows better than Rong Yu. Even if they become gray-haired old men and women in 30 or 50 years, even if they go through 10 more reincarnations, their identities and appearances will be completely different from this life. I will only love this one, and the relationship will not fade, but will be like a fermented wine. The longer the time, the stronger the emotion. Some feelings do not need to be described in gorgeous words, because only the inner feelings are the most real and will never deceive yourself. Rong Yu. Nan 11 tilted her head to look at him. Don't you ask me why Chu Nanyi was asked to get the money from the bank account instead of directly asking the Ministry of Revenue to allocate it from the Treasury. If I don't understand 11er's thoughts, how can I dare to say that I am the only one who loves 11er? Rong Yu chuckled and couldn't help but kiss her cheek. The Dongling imperial capital includes the imperial city Forbidden Army. There are nearly 300,000 soldiers in total. Chu Hong'ai holds the military power, and Commander Yang also holds the military power. Xie Xiaofu wants to reward the Black Obsidian Army, but does not say anything to other barracks. After this move spreads, it will definitely cause some generals to dissatisfied. The well-trained lower-level imperial guards and soldiers in the barracks would not have any ideas, but it could not stop the officials and generals of various factions from making a fuss about it. If the Empress directly transferred silver from the treasury, it would obviously be suspected of favoritism, but half of the Obsidian Army was composed of the Huainan Army and the other half was from the Great Zhou Army. No one came from the formal imperial army. Therefore, the favoritism of the Empress and the Regent would arouse the suspicion of the people below. After all, the Obsidian Army had not made any contributions recently, and there was no reason to be treated specially. Letting Chu Nanyi take silver from the bank would be completely different in nature. Even if someone was really dissatisfied, they could send him back on the grounds that the bank owner had paid out of his own pocket to reward the soldiers, which could reduce the dissatisfaction and trouble caused by this matter. Anyway, no one knew who was the master behind the bank. Nan 11 chuckled and said nothing. If it were in the past, she might have sighed that the position of emperor is really not for human beings. Every little thing has to be handled in a roundabout way, and every aspect has to be considered carefully. But now, after all, she has become accustomed to it. She will subconsciously think carefully and make careful arrangements to reduce unnecessary troubles as much as possible. Well, if she has time to deal with troubles, she might as well stay in the palace with Rongyu and enjoy the peace and quiet. However, Nan 11 has some thoughts about Prime Minister Xie's sudden decision to reward the Black Obsidian Army. She thought of Xiejin and believed that this matter was related to Xiejin. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 505. The matter is indeed closely related to Xiejin. If he does this himself, it will definitely attract some attention. Of course, it is also because now that he has officially entered the court, he can no longer act as he likes as before. The fifth level political participation is not yet qualified to decide how to reward the army. Once he does something that exceeds his status, the nature of this matter will be infinitely magnified. He doesn't want good things to turn into trouble. So the matter of taking advantage of his authority could only be done by his father's hands. In the evening, after taking a bath and changing clothes, Xiejin wore a cloud-colored light robe and reclined on the couch, listening to his subordinates' reports about the military camp in the western suburbs. The breeze blew slowly outside the open window, blowing away the heat of the day and bringing a slight sense of coolness. Xiejin had a smile on his lips, and his red phoenix eyes looked shiny under the light. Not long after, the general manager of the mansion came over to report, with a somewhat cautious tone, "Young master, Crown Prince Xianyuan is here." Xiejin looked up. A handsome young man in a silver-white military uniform walked in with a stern face. His elegant face was not as gentle and cute as usual, but looked a bit like Rongyu's indifference and alienation. No wonder the butler's tone was not right. Because Xiejin had said it first, the young prince would be allowed to come any time in the future without any notification. Therefore, even if Xianyuanyao seemed to be coming with bad intentions, the housekeeper did not dare to stop him and took him directly into Jinyuan. But at this time, some are worried that the prince will take action against his own son. "Go down," Xiejin said calmly, "everyone, go down. No matter what noise you hear later, there is no need to come in." Xianyuanyao couldn't help but frown when he heard this. No matter what noise you hear? What could be happening here? Could it be that he thought he would really do something to him? Although he really wanted to beat him up and flatten his beautiful face, so that he dared not go out to meet people recently, but this was the Xie family. If he really punched Mr. Xie's face, he didn't know what else he could do. Can't walk out standing upright. The servants quickly left. Xiejin raised his eyes and looked at Xianyuanyao's face, which was obviously not as fair as before, and raised his eyebrows casually. "Yao Yao is becoming more and more like a general." As a military general, Xianyuanyao has always been different from the delicate and frail princes of the imperial capital. His skin is a healthy wheat color. After coming to the imperial capital a few years ago, it has gradually become fairer and more delicate. However, these days he has been training non-stop in the military camp. After being exposed to the sun, the skin returned to its previous wheat color. As Xiejin watched, he felt more and more that this guy was so pleasing to his eyes. With a hint of a smile on his lips, he said slowly, "Sit down." Xianyuanyao stood still and said coldly, "Xiejin, what do you mean?" "Huh?" Xiejin was confused, "What do you mean? You are blatantly abusing your private power." "Yao Yao." Xiejin smiled lightly, Don't get so excited and get angry. Sit down and speak slowly. Xian Yuanyao stared at him expressionlessly. We haven't seen each other for several days, why are you still seeing Yao Yao? Xiejin sighed, although I really like your momentum of launching an investigation at this time, you can't convict me without asking questions, right? Why did I abuse my private power? Xian Yuanyao reminded him, melons and fruits. What happened to the melons and fruits? Xiejin frowned in confusion. Father was considerate of the fact that the soldiers had to train during the summer, so he sent some melons and fruits to the soldiers to relieve the heat. Moreover, this matter was approved by Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent. If you don't believe it, you can go to the palace and ask. Xian Yuanyao frowned, both Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent know. Nonsense. Xiejin picked up the teacup and took a sip. His Majesty also personally decreed that from now on, fruit herbal tea will be provided every 2 days to reward the Obsidian Army for their hard training. Xian Yuanyao's expression changed slightly, and he looked at him suspiciously, with an obvious look of inquiry in his eyes. Why is it that only the Obsidian Army has this treatment? Xiejin said calmly, because during this hot season, only the Obsidian Army is still training hard. It seems so. Xian Yuanyao frowned, as if he had convinced him, and for a moment he actually felt a little guilty and embarrassed about not coming to the stage. Actually, Yao Yao came to see me on purpose for the reason of raising an army to investigate. Xiejin raised his eyebrows. Miss me? Xian Yuanyao's face suddenly turned cold. It's really not easy to meet Yao Yao. Xiejin said melancholy. Lovesickness is hard to solve, but I have been lovesick recently. Xian Yuanyao interrupted him with a warning, General, I'm not here to listen to your nonsense. If there's nothing wrong, I'll leave first. After saying that, he turned around and left. Yao Yao. Xiejin frowned and stared at his back. Even if you are busy with military affairs, you can't be so busy that you don't even have time to say a few words. Xian Yuanyao said nothing. It's not that he doesn't have time to talk, it's that he doesn't want to talk to this nonsense-talking fox. However, Xian Yuanyao thought about it and realized that the two of them had indeed not seen each other for a long time. Although this person was always out of tune, the Xie family was loyal to their master, and the Xie family was so powerful that offending him seemed to have no benefit. Xian Yuanyao turned his head and said with a sullen face, if you can promise that you won't talk nonsense anymore, I will stay and have a cup of tea with you. Xiejin almost laughed at that moment. It's so cute, really. If he wasn't afraid of this guy being thin-skinned, he could hardly restrain the raised corners of his mouth. It was so cute. Although this term seems inappropriate to use on a general. But other than cute, he really couldn't think of any adjectives that could accurately describe his mood at this time. Xiejin thought of what his mother said about taking things step by step, suppressed the thought of teasing him, straightened his expression, raised his hand and said, sit down. Xian Yuanyao sat down, far away from Xiejin, deliberately keeping a safe distance. Xiejin saw it, but just smiled faintly, with a self-deprecating tone. Yao Yao is really unfamiliar with me now, and he treats me like a flood and a beast. Xian Yuanyao was made guilty by what he said, and coughed lightly, not really dash. I didn't do well enough. Xiejin lowered his eyes, and his voice was so light that no emotional fluctuations could be heard. If Prince Yao doesn't want to stay here, please do as you please, I won't force you. Xian Yuanyao's face changed slightly when he heard this. The simple-minded young man couldn't play with the cunning fox. When Xiejin said this, Xian Yuanyao couldn't help but think of the way they played and quarreled with each other in the past days, and even more of his kindness in sending him iced fruits to cool off in the morning. Regardless of what outsiders say about Xiejin, at least during the time Xian Yuanyao came to the imperial capital, he never did anything that was disadvantageous to him, and even defended him when he was in trouble. Xian Yuanyao was not an ungrateful person, he just. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 506. I got the top score in the palace examination before. Xiejin said indifferently. Yao Yao hasn't asked me since he came in. Does he not care at all, or has he forgotten about it? Ah. Xianyuan Yao said subconsciously, I already know. Yao Yao already knows. Xiejin raised his eyes, with some obvious surprise on his face. How do you know? Who told you? Haven't you been out of the barracks these days? Xianyuan Yao was speechless for a moment, and didn't know how to answer these questions. If he said truthfully that he took the initiative to inquire, I'm afraid Xiejin would be arrogant and talk nonsense again, but the fact is that he did inquire himself. Xianyuan Yao cleared his throat and said calmly, I heard it by accident. Xiejin's expression turned pale. Oh. Staying in the barracks and still being able to hear people talking about this by accident, the news in the barracks is really well informed. Xiejin curled the corners of his lips in an imperceptible way. Xianyuan Yao felt a little guilty, and an awkward look appeared on his handsome face. Congratulations. Thank you. Xiejin smiled lightly, but there is nothing to congratulate. For me, this is not a happy event. How could it be? Xianyuan Yao frowned. Being the top scholar is a great joy. Many students have studied hard for 10 years but still cannot get a place on the list. You are the top scholar right away, and you are very glorious. Even if your career is smooth in the future, the children of the imperial capital's aristocratic families can no longer say that you rely on the protection of the prime minister, but that you are completely capable. Yao Yao thinks too simply. Xiejin smiled faintly, with a bit of helplessness in his tone. Officialdom is complicated, people's hearts are hard to predict, and there are often too many conspiracies and tricks to guard against. Embarking on this road means that there will be countless political enemies in the future, open and covered, with swords and shadows and clouds and clouds. Some people are on good terms with you on the surface, but they may stab you in the back at any time. Do you think it is really that easy to be an official in the court? Xianyuan Yao was silent, thinking that a fox like you has a deep heart like the sea. Can ordinary people be your opponent? It's good that you don't plot against others, but it's your turn for others to plot against you. But Xiejin has always been wanton and flamboyant, and it's rare to have such a tone at this time. Maybe he really feels powerless when he first enters the officialdom, so he feels it. Moreover, the officialdom is indeed complicated, with intrigues and deceptions. Officials of various factions are harmonious on the surface, but there are many people who stab you in the back for their own interests. Those old foxes who have been immersed in power for decades are even more difficult to deal with. You may not know when they set a trap for you. Although Xiejin won the first place in the imperial examination, he had to start as a low-rank official according to the rules of the court. After entering the court, he was no longer just the legitimate son of Prime Minister Xie, but a fifth-rank official. He had to listen to all officials with higher ranks than him in the court. When Xianyuan Yao thought of his current situation, he also felt a little bit like walking on thin ice on the edge of a cliff. He had to be careful at every step and could no longer act without scruples as before. It seemed that there were suddenly many invisible constraints around him, and he should still be a little uncomfortable. Thinking of this, Xianyuan Yao felt a little sympathetic to him. It was still comfortable in the military camp. Although it was a bit tiring and hard, he didn't have to worry about being plotted against behind his back. With the support of the Queen and the Lord in the court, he didn't have to worry about someone stabbing him in the back because of his military power. That 1/3 acre of land was completely his own territory. The soldiers were loyal and brave, and they were passionate about serving the country and the people. Every day, when he saw those sweaty faces in training, Xianyuan Yao felt an indescribable passion fermenting in his lungs. What is Yao Yao thinking about? Xianyuan Yao suddenly came back to his senses. Looking up at Xiejin's delicate face, he said calmly, I can't help you with the affairs of the court. If you have any difficulties, you can often talk to the master, or ask for help from Prime Minister Xie. You are his son, so you don't have to worry about losing face. What can I say? Xiejin smiled calmly, do I have to tell the master every time I am unhappy? What kind of person am I? I am not a 3-year-old child who is thinking about crying and complaining all day long. Xian Yuanyao choked, it's okay to say it occasionally. I can't bring myself to do this, Xiejin said calmly, besides, you know the master's temperament. Except for Her Majesty the Queen, will it be useful for others to complain to him? The master only distinguishes between capable and incompetent people. If I really dare to complain, I am afraid that it won't take long for me to be kicked out of the court for incompetence and sent to the border to repair the city. Xian Yuanyao choked again. Really? His master's temperament, even if he is a mother hen protecting her chicks, the premise is that the chicks being protected must have enough ability. Besides, Xiejin is aloof, how could he do such a thing as complaining? In fact, if there is a friend who can often tell the truth, it can relieve the depression in my heart. Xiejin took a sip of tea slowly, but it's easy to find a beauty, but it's hard to find a confidant. How easy is it to find a friend who is willing to listen to your heart and is reliable and not worried about stabbing you in the back? Xian Yuanyao frowned and looked at him calmly. Xiejin's eyebrows were slightly frowned, and his elegant eyebrows and eyes faintly revealed a bit of loneliness that was not common in daily life. Xian Yuanyao couldn't help but think of the prophecy again. Alone, lonely for the rest of his life. His heart twisted slightly. Such an outstanding man, is he really going to be alone for the rest of his life? Well, he coughed slightly and spoke calmly, if you don't mind it, I would be willing to come over occasionally to relieve your worries. However, our army's training schedule is tight and we can't come often. Maybe 10 days and a half can be spared. A little time. Is what Yao Yao said true? Xiejin's eyes lit up, and the loneliness in the corners of his eyebrows disappeared instantly. It's okay to come here once every 10 days and a half, so that I won't feel lonely and bored anymore, even if I don't do anything, just if you talk and drink with me, I will feel supported and no longer suffer. Xian Yuanyao paused and said. Is it necessary to be so excited? He just said casually, it's hard to say whether he will come over in the future, can't you hear the comforting words? Yao Yao, Xiejin frowned, you're not trying to trick me, are you? A man's words are hard to follow, so how can he go back on his word? Xian Yuanyao said bravely, why are you coaxing me? I will come over when I have time, and you don't have to worry about me stabbing you in the back. Even if Yao Yao stabs you in the back, I am willing to be stabbed in the back. Xiejin's eyes were burning and his tone was sincere, my sincerity towards Yao Yao is as deep as the sea, and I can give you my life. Xian Yuanyao gritted his teeth, his face turning dark blue. He really shouldn't trust this fox. Give him 3 points of color, and he opens a dying room, which is simply hopeless. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 507. Xiejin glanced at his livid face and seemed a little puzzled. Is Yao Yao unhappy? What I mean is that the sincerity towards friends is as deep as the sea, and he is willing to sacrifice his life for his friends. Don't you think that friends should be like this? Xian Yuanyao paused and looked at him expressionlessly. Of course, I won't let Yao Yao stab me. Xiejin smiled lightly, as long as Yao Yao is willing to come and talk to me occasionally. Xian Yuanyao took a deep breath. He really wanted to tell Xiejin that although he was not as thoughtful as him, not as cunning as him, and not as cunning as him, he was really not a fool who could be fooled by others. Every word Xiejin said today was treating him as a fool. Xian Yuanyao realized that it was unnecessary for him to stay here, so he stood up and said lightly, I have something else to do, so I won't chat with you anymore. Come and listen to Juye's heart-to-heart talk when you have time in the future. Of course, the premise is that you have really been wronged in the court. Xiejin raised his eyebrows. Are you leaving now? I didn't plan to stay here for dinner. Xian Yuanyao snorted coldly. Xiejin, I can teach you a trick. Xiejin was curious. What? You can try to anger the master. Xian Yuanyao smiled, and the smile faded the gloomy anger on his face, looking particularly harmless. For example, offend Her Majesty the Queen, and then provoke the master to beat you with a court stick. Not too many, 80 will be enough. After being seriously injured and bedridden, I will definitely bring the best medicine to see you, and by the way, listen to your inner distress. After saying this, he left without looking back, no longer interested in staying to listen to his nonsense. Xiejin leaned against the brocade couch in silence, thinking about the advice a young leopard had given him, shook his head, and couldn't help but sigh. 80 strokes of the cane? How cruel! Although the cane was not needed for the time being, this sentence reminded him that he could achieve his goal in other ways. The little leopard was not stupid, but it was true that he was easily soft-hearted. Xiejin loosened his slightly clenched hands, raised his palms, and stared quietly at his white, slender, and bony fingers. Just now, for a moment, he actually wanted to keep him, and even wanted to do something urgently, but he held back. Don't be anxious, he told himself. Even if you can conquer the little leopard with brute force, the leopard's sharp claws can easily hurt others and yourself, and his simple but arrogant temper, it would not be good for anyone to push him into a hurry. What he needs to do is to be patient and take it slowly, using the method of boiling a frog in warm water to get him used to it. However, Xiejin was silent for a moment, and the corners of his mouth slowly raised a deep and unfathomable smile. Boiling a frog in warm water? He had never been so patient with anyone. In fact, his biggest idea just now was to imprison him, lock his flexible limbs with iron chains made of 1,000-year-old black iron, and let him do whatever he wanted without any resistance. Xiejin imagined such a scene in his mind, and suddenly felt particularly itchy. But it couldn't work. He sighed with some regret. It's easy to conquer a person, and it's not difficult to destroy a person. The difficult thing is that it's not so easy to repair after the destruction. What he wants is a vigorous general, a young man with lively eyebrows and eyes, and a confidant who is willing to fight side by side with him, not a trapped beast that has lost its vitality and energy after being conquered. So he has to grind slowly. Tisk. It's really difficult. At sunset in the evening, Xian Yuanqi, who was waiting impatiently, almost kicked the door. While Naniji was opening the door to get something, he grabbed her arm. How is the young lady? Did she give birth? Why is there no movement? Naniji had been asked this question many times today, but she understood that the prince loved his wife so much, and said patiently, "Don't worry, prince, the young lady's birth canal is not open yet, and she has to wait for a while before giving birth." Wait a little longer? Xian Yuanqi's face was extremely ugly. How long do we have to wait? This. Naniji hesitated. It's hard to say, it may be in the first half of the night, or it may be in the second half of the night. Xian Yuanqi said angrily, why is it taking so long? If the man in front of her was not the prince, Naniji would definitely retort him coldly, it takes so long for women to give birth, and it's not just your family. But the man in front of her is the prince of Jingwang Mansion, her master, and Naniji dare not retort him. Why don't you go and rest, my lord, she patiently advised. When the young lady gives birth, I will send someone to inform the lord immediately. I'm not going anywhere, Xian Yuanqi said coldly. Hong I gave birth to my child, how can I leave her alone to suffer here? Madame Ji was speechless by him. After a moment, she said hesitantly, then my lord, please be patient. Giving birth is not that fast. Madam is in good health. Apart from a little pain, there will be no other problems. A little pain? Xian Yuanqi subconsciously wanted to ask how much it hurt, why he didn't hear Hong Ai's voice. But he quickly thought of his little ancestor's strong and indifferent character. Even if it was really painful, he would only endure it by himself. How could he scream out loud? Thinking of this, Xian Yuanqi suddenly felt that it was not good for a woman to be too strong. Sometimes she should be weaker. Madame Ji walked in quickly and closed the door again. Xian Yuanqi looked at the darkening sky, his anxiety increased sharply, and he kept pacing in the yard, wishing that he could take the pain for his little ancestor. Princess Jing came over, followed by 4 maids. "You haven't eaten all day today, are you hungry? I asked someone to prepare some food for you, you dash." "I don't want to eat." Xian Yuanqi refused her kindness without thinking. "I can't eat." Princess Jing paused, and said lightly, "After Hong Ai gives birth, you still have to take care of her. How can you have the strength if you don't eat?" "How can I be in the mood to eat now?" Xian Yuanqi frowned, staring at the direction of the door. "I'm not hungry, mother, let them take everything away." Princess Jing was silent for a moment, raised her hand to signal, and the maids took the wontons cooked in the chicken soup that had been carefully boiled for 2 hours in the kitchen and retreated. "Have you thought of a name for the child?" Seeing her son was like an ant on a hot pot, Princess Jing had to speak to him to divert his attention. "Do you want a son or a daughter for the first child?" Xian Yuanqi turned around after hearing this, thought for a while and said, "A son." Princess Jing smiled and said, "I also think it's good to have a son, who can inherit your title." "I don't think so," Xian Yuanqi said in a slightly slower tone. "If Hong Ai and I have a son, he will be the same age as the prince, and he will enter the palace to read, and we can train him to be the prince's right-hand man from a young age. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered." Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 508. Princess Jing nodded slowly. "You are right. Originally I thought it would be nice to have more children. In the future, the house would be lively and the children would have company." Xian Yuanqi turned his head and looked at the door, frowning, "But giving birth is too painful. I don't want Hong Ai to suffer so much." Princess Jing was silent. As the mistress of the palace, she probably couldn't understand her son's thoughts. Even if she felt sorry for his wife, she didn't feel so sorry for her. Getting married and having children are 2 things that women must go through in their lives. Every family has gone through this. Is it necessary to be so hypocritical? It's not that she doesn't feel sorry for other women. It's because she herself is also a woman, and she lives in a powerful family. Over the years, she has seen the humble attitude of the wives who are usually glorious and prominent in giving birth. If she can give her husband a legitimate son, she can stand up straight. If she gives birth to a daughter, she will feel ashamed in front of everyone, and she is also worried that she will lose favor and affect her status. No one has ever talked about the pain that women go through when giving birth. In their opinion, as long as they can give birth to a son, all the pain is nothing. Even women themselves don't feel sorry for themselves, so how can they expect men who only care about their careers to feel sorry for them? This is the first time that Princess Jing has seen a man lose control because of his wife's childbirth, and this man is her son. "Princess," the prince Nanny Ji opened the door and came out. "The young lady seems to be giving birth." Xian Yuanqi was anxious and subconsciously rushed in. "The prince can't go in." Bang! As soon as the voice fell, Nanny Ji raised her hand to close the door and held it tightly with her body, fearing that the prince would really break in without knowing the truth. Xian Yuanqi's nose was almost flattened. There were a few subtle suppressed moans coming from the room, and Xian Yuanqi's heart was twisted. He wanted to rush in and hold the little ancestor in his arms, but... "I'll go in and take a look." Princess Jing stretched out her hand and pulled her son aside. "It should be soon, don't worry." As she said that, Princess Jing stretched out her hand and knocked on the door. "It's me." When Nanny Ji heard the princess' voice, She exhaled softly and opened the door from the inside. In the inner room, the midwives were encouraging one after another, "Young madam, try harder, the young master will come out soon. I can see the head. Try harder. Courier, hand me the scissors. Hot water. Young madam, take a breath, try harder. It's coming out. Wow." Accompanied by a shocking cry, Chu Hongii gave birth to a son safely at the hour of Yu. Xian Yuan Qi staggered, held the wall to stand firm, and was sweating all over. Raising his hand to wipe his forehead, he breathed a sigh of relief and walked into the inner room. The midwives were all around the newborn baby, eager to see whether the child was a boy or a girl. It was a boy. The midwife Zheng was also the queen's personal midwife before. She had delivered the queen in the palace, the little prince in the palace, and a little master in the Jingwang mansion. She felt that this must be a blessing from God. The noble family must be happier to have a son than a daughter. She delivered a son twice in a row. At this time, she was so happy that her old eyes narrowed. "Congratulations, prince, congratulations, it's a young master." The princess of Jing smiled and said, "Hold him for me." "Princess, wait a moment, wait until the servant has washed the little master's body before holding him." The princess of Jing stood aside, watching the midwives wash the newborn with warm water, and she couldn't hide her smile. The room was filled with a strong smell of blood. It was summer again, the windows were not open, and the inner room was as hot as a steamer. Xian Yuan Qi stood in front of the bed, looking at Chu Hongii with a distressed look on her pale face. Her messy hair was spread on the pillow, her pale forehead was dripping with sweat, and her lips were dry and peeling. He had never seen such a weak little ancestor, even if she had suffered hardships in martial arts training before, even if she had been injured before, she had never been so weak and pale. Hongii Xian Yuan Qi squatted down and held her hand tightly. "Thank you for your hard work." Chu Hongii looked at him quietly, her voice hoarse and dry. "I feel fine." Xian Yuan Qi paused. "Fine? How fine? Obviously so weak." But he knew she was a strong person, so he followed her words and said, "Well, my wife is the best." The midwives washed the little guy, wrapped him in a soft and thin silk swaddling cloth, and brought him to Princess Jing. "Go and claim your reward," Princess Jing ordered calmly, then turned to look at Hongii. "I asked the kitchen to stew some fish soup for you, you eat first." "Thank you, Mother," Chu Hongii said, "but I'm not hungry yet, I want to sleep first and eat tomorrow morning." Princess Jing looked at the sky outside. It was already late at night, it was not good to eat at this time. It's just that Chu Hongii is weak after giving birth, and needs to replenish some vitality. "Young madam has just given birth, it's not good to eat at this time," the nanny reported. "Since young madam is not hungry, princess, don't force her, let young madam sleep for 2 hours, and eat after dawn. It's best to drink some millet porridge in the morning, and then start eating some nutritious food at noon tomorrow." Princess Jing heard this and nodded slowly. "Okay." The news that Chu Hongii gave birth safely soon spread to the palace. Her Majesty and the regent had just finished a hearty exercise, and Nan 11 was naturally happy when she heard the palace people report, "It's good to be safe. My son has a playmate now." Rong Yu lowered his head and pecked Nan 11 on the face. "They are a couple who know how to behave." Nan 11 heard this and gave him a subtle look. Know how to behave? This really doesn't sound like what the regent would say. However, Nan 11's idea was quickly slapped in the face. "Wrong, you never cared about face in front of her. We will leave Dongling in September, and we can let Chu Hongii move into the palace temporarily." Nan 11 was stunned. "Let Chu Hongii move into the palace? What's the logic? Her son will be more than 2 months old in September, and she can move in with Hao-er." Wrong, you made a wishful calculation. Mother-in-law will take care of Hao-er, and Chu Hongii will take care of her son. She is a strong martial artist, so she can take care of the two children together and fulfill her responsibility to protect them. Nan 11 was completely speechless. She felt that Rong Yu's idea was really. Rong Yu lay on his side beside her, holding his chin, and asked, 11 do you think this is bad? Xian Yu and Qi will hate you to death. The young couple got married not long ago, and it was the time of deep love. If Chu Hong'ai wanted to enter the palace, it would mean that Xian Yu and Qi would have to stay alone in the empty room for a while. It would be strange if he didn't hate him. He dare not. Rong Yu smiled lightly, don't forget who holds the fate of his son. Nan 11 was speechless for a moment. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 509. At the same time, in the same palace, people of the same status have completely opposite fates. It was late at night, and it was a time for loving couples to be affectionate. However, in Xian Yu and Yan's room, there were waves of suppressed screams and groans. The maids stood outside the door with their heads down as usual, enduring the bites of mosquitoes, and the familiar voices echoed in their ears. The scene that had been played out in the room every night in the past few months had become a habit for them, and they even felt numb. In the Wei Palace, they were just maids who had no choice. They couldn't even guarantee their own life and death. Who dared to care about the master's affairs? Fortunately, they were ordinary in appearance and could not catch the eyes of their own masters. Otherwise, they would have been a wisp of wronged souls in the underworld. In recent years, many young maids around them were dragged out in their prime. They had seen a lot, and although they were numb, they were still afraid. So sometimes, it's not a bad thing to be ugly. At least when serving the devil, you can live a few more years. Come here, Xian Yu and Yan's cold voice came from the room, serve me a bath. The maids shuddered when they heard the voice, and they didn't dare to delay for a moment, and hurriedly turned around and went into the house. Some people prepared clothes, some people cleaned up the mess in the room, and some people went to get hot water. But no one dared to look at the bed in the inner room. Fang Lanyi, who was naked, lay on the bed like a rag doll, her body covered with mottled bruises and swelling marks, and there was still some dried blood at the corners of her cracked mouth. Her hair was messy, her face was pale, and her eyes stared at the roof without any reaction for a long time. The inner room was filled with a faint, bloody and chaotic atmosphere. People who didn't know would think that this was another brothel girl or a maid who had been murdered. Who would have thought that in a noble palace, the original wife would be treated like this? Xian Yu and Yan was half leaning on the brocade couch in the inner room, wearing only a loose piece of clothing, leaning on the couch with his eyes closed, looking boneless, his face gloomy, his eyebrows and eyes showing some abnormal paleness due to excessive indulgence, coupled with years of tyranny. His body was full of a lingering and frightening sinister aura. The maids cleaned the room quietly, not daring to make a sound. Xian Yu and Yan was actually in a good mood at this time. After all, he had just vented his anger once, and the tyranny in his body had been temporarily satisfied. He was just a little tired and wanted to rest for a while. Usually at this time, he would not toss and turn after bathing and changing clothes, and he could sleep until dawn if he was too tired, but even so, the maids still did not dare to take any risks, and did their own things carefully, just hoping to serve Xian Yu and Yan smoothly and not cause any more trouble. But tonight was destined to have some twists and turns. When the maid went to the kitchen to get hot water, the Princess of Wei, who had received the news, knew that her son had finished his work and was ready to rest. Normally, she would not come to disturb him, but tonight, she learned that Chu Hong'ai had just given birth to a big fat boy. She couldn't sit still for a while, so she ordered the maid to go to the kitchen to stew chicken soup for an hour or so, and she personally delivered it to her son's yard. This is the ginseng chicken soup that I specially ordered the kitchen to stew for you. Drink some to replenish your body." Princess of Wei looked at her son's pale face with distress. "You haven't rested much recently, right? How many times have I told you to take it easy and don't tire yourself out? Why don't you listen?" Her tone sounded really kind and gentle. Those who didn't know thought that Xian Yuanyan was very hardworking and had done many great things for the country and the people. However, who would have thought that such hardship was just because he had just tortured his wife to death in bed and treated his wife as a maid to vent? The maid with delicate features knelt on the ground. She was afraid in her heart, but she dared not show anything on her face. She respectfully and cautiously fed Xian Yuanyan a spoonful of chicken soup. Xian Yuanyan, who didn't want to move at all, just opened his mouth, and played out the noble and domineering nature to the fullest. Hearing his mother's words at this time, he opened his eyes and said in a cold voice, "If it weren't for this bitch, would I have to stay in jail for so long? Keeping her alive is already kind to her." Hearing this, the Princess of Wei glanced at Fang Lanyi lying on the bed with disgust. Seeing that she didn't move at all, like a corpse, her expression became colder. "Other daughters-in-law in the palace are giving birth to children for their husbands, and have branches and leaves. My daughter-in-law in the Prince of Wei's palace is very noble. Not to mention giving birth to a son or a daughter, she dares to have this attitude towards her mother-in-law. It really makes me look at her in a new light." As soon as these words came out, the maids in the room changed their faces and knelt down in unison. Isn't it their fault that the young lady doesn't know the rules? If the princess gets angry, no one will have a good life. Fang Lanyi's consciousness was fuzzy at this time. She could hear someone talking in her ear and could tell who was talking, but she had no strength left. She was in a daze like a walking corpse, and even moving her fingers was extremely difficult. So the words of Princess Wei really had no effect on her. "It's getting late, mother, go back and rest." Xian Yuanyan drank some chicken soup, raised his hand and waved away the maid. "My son should also take a bath and rest. Let her go to pay her respects to you early tomorrow morning, and you can set rules for her." Princess Wei retracted her gaze, hummed lightly, and finally couldn't help but said, "There is good news just from Prince Jing's mansion." Good news? Xian Yuanyan thought of Xian Yuanqi, who was in high spirits recently, and his brows became more gloomy. What good news? Chu Hongii gave birth to a son. Princess Wei frowned, and then said to Xian Yuanyan earnestly, "Yandere, you have been having some snacks recently. No matter how much you hate Fang Lanyi, she is also your official wife, and she is the only one who gave birth to her son. Your son is your legitimate son. Give birth to your legitimate son as soon as possible while your imperial grandfather is still alive, and go to him to ask for a title. Even if you lose the title of heir apparent, as long as your imperial grandfather still cherishes his old feelings, he will not treat your child badly." Xian Yuanyan was silent for a moment. The emperor's grandfather is old, and he is always away from home. "Mother, do you think that bitch with impure blood in the palace will make it easier for me?" Princess Wei's face changed slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, "If you really can't do it, go cry to the emperor's grandfather and ask for an amulet so that she can't touch you in the future. But the prerequisite is that there must be a legitimate son first. A baby in swaddling clothes can always make people feel soft. If the child looks like Yandere when she was a child, it will arouse the pity and love of the old lady. If the time comes to pretend to be pitiful and show weakness at the right time, you won't believe it. He is not soft-hearted." Xian Yuanyan closed his eyes, thinking of the past glory and current abjection, thinking of the inexplicable conspiracy before and the subsequent imprisonment. The resentment and dissatisfaction buried in his heart grew crazily. If possible, he would like to kill those two people right away. The body was broken into pieces. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 510. His eyebrows became more sinister. After a long time, Xian Yuanyan said, Don't worry, mother, I know what to do. Princess Wei hummed, gave him a few more careful instructions, and then said, "It's getting late, you should go to bed early." After saying that, he glanced at Fang Lanyi lying on the bed with disgust, then turned and left with the maid. Suan Yuanyan sat alone on the couch for a long time, and all that came to his mind was the love his grandfather had shown him since he was a child, and the respectful flattery of court officials and young masters in front of him. How prosperous was Xian Yuanyan's life at that time. Even though he was not in good health, he allowed him to choose the noble girls from aristocratic families who wanted to marry into Prince Wei's palace. If he had gotten married early, why would he wait until now for Fang Lanyi, who was unlucky for him? Ever since the regents of the great Zhou dynasty, Rong Yu and Nan 11, came to Dongling, his status has plummeted. He was demoted from the noble grandson of the crown prince to the heir apparent. Not long after, he was deprived of his position as the heir apparent. The bitch in the palace couldn't tolerate him at all. I am afraid that once the imperial grandfather dies, she will immediately find an excuse to get rid of him. Suan Yuanyan sneered. Do you really think he will sit still and wait for death? No, he had to find a way to keep himself safe. Mother was right, for now, only children could soften the emperor's grandfather's heart, and he had to have a legitimate son first. Xian Yuanyan turned around and looked at Fang Lanyi, who was unconscious on the bed. His eyes were full of coldness and boredom. Although this woman was not a good thing, she was his legitimate wife. With his current status, he could only be the legitimate wife of a noble family. There are not many women willing to marry him. Besides Fang Lanyi, who else can he expect to have children for the time being? As long as there is a legitimate son who can regain favor in front of the emperor's grandfather, it will not be too late to keep this woman and slowly deal with it later. Suan Yuanyan thought coldly. He must regain his previous status and take revenge on those who have hurt him these days. Chu Hong'ai stayed in confinement for 40 days. Summer is unbearably hot, especially for women in confinement. Fortunately, the treatment of the powerful family was good. Several basins of ice cubes were placed outside the house to cool down, so the heat in the inner room was not so severe. Xian Yuanqi felt sorry for his beloved wife, and ignored the things outside at all, and continued to stay with the palace. Wife and children. Although the population of Prince Jing's mansion was simple and there was no intrigue, it was better to take preventive measures than to regret it later. Even if his worries were unfounded, he had to make sure everything was foolproof. His beloved wife was weak after giving birth and was in bed recuperating. As a husband, he should naturally be by his side, serving tea and water to relieve his daughter-in-law's boredom. With her beautiful and considerate husband taking good care of her day and night, Chu Hong'ai's confinement passed quickly. The couple racked their brains every day during confinement to think of what to name their child. It seemed boring, but it was boring. It feels a bit leisurely and warm. As summer turns to autumn, the climate begins to lose its heat at the end of July. After August, it becomes cooler day by day. Newborn children are raised to be white and tender. Chu Hong'ai, who has been in confinement for 40 days, has also become a delicate daughter. She has not gone out for 40 days. Her skin is visibly plumper, whiter, and tenderer. She is as fragile as a newborn baby and has always been cold. Her eyebrows have become noticeably smoother and softer after becoming a mother. Xian Yuanqi cherished his wife. During the confinement period, he was busy taking care of his daughter-in-law and son, and did not think about the joy of life. When Chu Hong'ai finally recovered her health and could use her husband and wife normally, Xian Yuanqi did not expect that, but his happy days will soon come to an end. Because Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent are going back to Dazhu. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with him, but that damn overbearing regent actually had his mind set on Hong Yi. It seems that Rong Yu is also responsible for government affairs. After taking over the Dongling kingdom in this life, he never thought about being willful, so in the 2 months before leaving, he arranged the affairs of the court properly. When he and Nan 11 left Dongling, Chief Xie was fully in charge of the military affairs of the court. He made the final decision on all major affairs related to military affairs, while other matters were under the jurisdiction of Prime Minister Liu. Important court affairs need to be reviewed by Xie Jin and Xian Yuanchen before they are presented. Although these two people do not have high official positions, their status as the regent's confidants is enough to make no one dare to neglect them. Only the matter of letting Chu Hong'ai enter the palace was left to the end, so that this decision directly caused an explosion in Prince Jing's palace. Hong'ai goes to live in the palace. Princess Jing was surprised. Why is that? Xian Yuanqi put down the teacup with a bang. His beautiful face was black and blue. Why else? Let Hong'ai coax his son. Seeing his angry tone, Princess Jing frowned and reminded, even if you are in your own home, you have to be careful what you say. How can you be so disrespectful? The regent is too domineering. Why don't you let me say anything? Xian Yuanqi sneered. He hugged his beloved wife and loved her so much that he tried every means to bring Her Majesty the Queen with him even when he returned to Zhou dynasty, but he separated our husband and wife. How could this be possible? The truth. Princess Jing was silent for a moment. It does not seem very authentic. This is why Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent trust me, Chu Hong'ai said calmly. Although there are defenses outside the Dajhan Palace, the people responsible for taking care of His Highness the Crown Prince are the eldest princess and the wet nurse. They are both women. They don't know martial arts. It's always inconvenient for the prince's palace guards to come in and out. I live in the palace and can solve many problems. Xian Yuanqi frowned and couldn't help but look at Chu Hong'ai. So you think his arrangement is reasonable? His eyes were very unkind. It seems to have a meaning of you dare to say it is reasonable to try. Chu Hong'ai glanced at him, thinking that no one could disobey this arrangement, but she knew that men sometimes need to be coaxed, so she changed her words to, Her Majesty the Queen should give us compensation. Compensation. Xian Yuanqi wanted to say that what he needed most now was compensation from his wife. The regent's decision was too unreasonable. Why did the queen's cousin let him do it? They were inseparable, but he was asked to live separately from Hong'ai. It was simply unreasonable. Whether you like it or not, since this matter has been decided, it is an imperial decree and cannot be disobeyed, Chu Hong'ai said. Besides, the regent is not bored enough to deliberately separate us. This decision must have been carefully considered. Xian Yuanqi looked at her dissatisfiedly. Then I can only be wronged. Princess Jing coughed lightly. She really couldn't bear to see her son's sad tone at this time. It was really tingling. You two should discuss this matter between yourselves. I'll go see Genre first. She had a subtle expression on her face. After saying this, she turned around and walked out. She had no interest in staying here to watch a grown man complain. Chu Hong'ai was silent for a moment, thinking briefly. The regent's order must not be violated, and the man in front of her must also need to be coaxed. Let my mother take care of Genre tonight, she said. I will fight with you for 300 rounds.